Hi, my name is Laura. I'm your friendly finance guide. It was a cold morning in January 2026. Daniel placed his coffee on the table, opened his laptop, and logged into his retirement account. He stared at the screen for a few seconds. Then it came again. Not the loud, heart-racing panic, not the kind that makes your hands shake. This was quieter, heavier, the slow, sinking kind of fear, the kind that feels like the ground beneath you is shifting, just slightly, but enough to make you question your balance. The number on the screen was higher than last year, but not high enough, not where it was supposed to be, not where the projections once promised it would be, not where all those confident financial podcasts said it would land if he just stayed disciplined. 23 years. For 23 years, Daniel had done everything right. He never lived extravagantly. When his friends traveled to Europe, he picked up extra shifts. When coworkers upgraded to new SUVs, he kept driving his aging sedan. 12 years. Same car. Every rattle familiar. He automated his savings before he allowed himself to spend. Every month, without fail, a portion of his paycheck went straight into his retirement fund. Even when money felt tight. Even when bonuses didn't come. Even when unexpected expenses showed up at the worst possible time. Pay yourself first. That was the rule. He believed in consistency. He believed in compound interest. He believed that markets go up in the long run. He believed that patience wins. And for years, that belief felt solid. But sitting there in 2026, staring at the screen, something didn't add up anymore. Inflation had technically cooled compared to the early 2020s. At least that's what headlines said. But prices never really went back down. The grocery bill told a different story. Milk cost more. Eggs cost more. Produce cost more. It wasn't shocking anymore, just quietly exhausting. Rent was worse. Daniel had always planned to buy a home soon. He'd been saying that for nearly a decade. But every year, prices climbed just a little faster than his savings for a down payment. He wasn't irresponsible. He wasn't overspending. He wasn't chasing luxury. The math just kept moving. And then there was health insurance. Every year came the same polite email. We're improving your coverage. Due to rising costs, premiums will increase slightly. Slightly. He once compared his current premiums to what he paid 7 years earlier. They had nearly doubled. If this was what healthcare cost while he was healthy and employed, what would it look like in retirement? He opened an old spreadsheet, the one he built back in 2015. Back then, he was optimistic. The projection line rose steadily upward. At 65, he would hit his number. Financial freedom, stability, a modest but comfortable retirement. He updated the numbers using 2026 assumptions. The graph changed. The finish line moved. If everything went perfectly, steady returns, no major crashes, no job loss, no health crisis, he might still have to work longer than planned. If anything went wrong, the plan cracked. That was the moment the thought hit him. Am I failing, or has the system changed? Because the truth was, Daniel wasn't careless. He didn't carry credit card debt for fun. He didn't chase get-rich-quick schemes. He didn't panic during downturns. During the market crash of the early 2020s, he stayed invested. When others pulled out in fear, he reminded himself, think long-term. He believed in the formula. Work hard, save consistently, invest wisely, retire comfortably. That formula worked for his father. His father retired in 2002 with a pension, a paid-off home, and healthcare costs that were manageable. Life wasn't extravagant, but it was secure. Daniel grew up believing that if he followed the same principles, he'd arrive at the same destination. But 2026 wasn't 2002. Pensions were rare, housing felt out of reach, healthcare costs were unpredictable. Job stability felt fragile in a world reshaped by automation and AI. The promise had quietly shifted. No one announced it. No one sent a memo saying, by the way, the old roadmap no longer guarantees the outcome. But the evidence was right there on his screen. He closed the laptop. The room felt still. It wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of realization. For the first time, Daniel allowed himself to question the narrative he had followed for decades. Maybe the problem wasn't a lack of discipline. Maybe it wasn't poor decision-making. Maybe it wasn't personal failure. Maybe the dream itself had been designed for a different era. an era of rising wages that matched productivity, an era when housing costs were proportional to income, an era when employer loyalty and pensions were common, an era when healthcare didn't threaten to consume decades of savings. Daniel wasn't living recklessly. He was living in a time when doing everything right no longer guaranteed security. And that's the sad truth about saving for retirement in 2026. You can sacrifice, you can stay consistent, you can weather every market storm, and still find yourself uncertain. Because retirement planning today isn't just about discipline, it's about navigating structural shifts that individuals can't fully control. Daniel would still go to work tomorrow. He would still contribute to his retirement account next month. He wasn't giving up, but something inside him had changed. He no longer believed blindly in the old promise. Because in 2026, the most dangerous risk isn't market volatility. It's assuming that yesterday's formula still guarantees tomorrow's safety. A week after that January morning, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a notebook, a calculator, and something he hadn't felt in years: doubt. Not panic, not despair, just doubt. For most of his adult life, retirement planning had felt like solving a long equation. Complicated, yes, but predictable. If you saved a certain percentage, earned an average return, and stayed invested long enough, the numbers would eventually align. That's what every chart showed. That's what every financial book repeated. That's what every retirement calculator confirmed. But the numbers in front of him now felt different. Daniel decided to start from scratch. He wrote down a simple question: what will I actually need? Not the optimistic version, not the best-case scenario, the realistic one. He calculated housing first. Even if he managed to buy a home before retiring, property taxes would still exist. Maintenance would still exist. Insurance would still exist. Homes didn't suddenly become free once the mortgage disappeared. Then utilities, food, transportation, basic living expenses, and then the real wild card, healthcare. He had read that the average couple retiring in the mid-2020s might need hundreds of thousands of dollars just to cover medical expenses throughout retirement, and that didn't even include long-term care. He imagined a scenario: one surgery, one chronic condition, one extended hospital stay. Years of careful saving could be reshaped by a single diagnosis. He paused. This wasn't how retirement used to feel when he first started planning. Back then, the biggest variable seemed to be market performance. Now, it felt like everything was a variable. He ran a conservative estimate. If he retired at 65 and lived until 90, which wasn't unrealistic anymore, his savings would need to last 25 years. 25 years without a paycheck. That realization alone was heavy. Retirement used to represent an ending. Now it looked more like a second lifetime. And that's where the math started breaking down. The old 4% rule, withdraw 4% of your portfolio each year, assumed certain historical returns, certain bond yields, certain inflation patterns. It was built on decades of economic behavior that may not repeat in the same way. In a world of unpredictable inflation spikes, geopolitical instability, technological disruption, and shifting labor markets, historical averages felt less comforting. Daniel adjusted his projections. If returns were lower than expected, if inflation ticked higher again, if another recession hit 5 years before retirement, every small adjustment pushed the safe number higher. He noticed something unsettling. The target kept moving. The more cautious he tried to be, the more impossible the number looked. He leaned back in his chair. His father never had to calculate this much. His father had a pension, guaranteed income for life. That single factor reduced uncertainty dramatically. Social Security was a supplement, not the foundation. Daniel's generation? It was mostly self-funded. Defined contribution plans instead of defined benefit plans. Translation? The risk moved from institutions to individuals. If the market underperformed, it was his problem. If inflation surged, it was his problem. If healthcare costs exploded, it was his problem. There was no corporate cushion. He began thinking about job security too. For decades, the assumption was simple: work steadily until your mid-60s. But 2026 didn't feel steady. Automation was accelerating. Artificial intelligence was reshaping industries. Entire job categories were evolving faster than college curriculums could adapt. Daniel wasn't anti-technology. In fact, He used AI tools at work daily. They made him more efficient, more productive. But he couldn't ignore the quiet question in the back of his mind. What if more efficient eventually means less necessary? If he lost his job at 58 instead of 65, would he be able to find comparable work? At the same salary? With the same benefits? Age discrimination wasn't new. It was just rarely discussed openly. Retirement planning assumed stable income until a chosen exit date. Reality didn't always cooperate. Then came the emotional layer, the part no calculator captured. For years, Daniel had delayed gratification. He skipped experiences in his 30s and 40s because he believed in a more secure future version of himself. He told himself, "I'll travel later, I'll relax later, I'll enjoy life later." But what if later required working longer than expected? What if retirement wasn't a clean break at 65, but a gradual tapering into part-time work out of necessity rather than choice? The math wasn't just numbers anymore. It was time, energy, health, opportunity cost. He realized something uncomfortable. The traditional retirement model assumed a linear life. Work hard, retire, rest. But modern life looked more fragmented. Career pivots, economic shocks, healthcare surprises, caregiving responsibilities for aging parents, adult children moving back home because housing costs were overwhelming. The old spreadsheet didn't account for layered realities. Daniel flipped to a new page in his notebook. He wrote, "What if retirement isn't an age?" That thought lingered, because the deeper truth wasn't that saving was pointless. It was that the framework was outdated. The math used to rely on predictability. Predictable wage growth, predictable inflation, predictable healthcare costs, predictable job security, predictable market cycles. In 2026, predictability felt rare, and yet people were still being handed the same advice from decades ago. Max out your 401k, stay invested, don't time the market, you'll be fine. Fine. Daniel wasn't looking for luxury. He was looking for certainty, or at least reasonable confidence. Instead, the equation felt fragile, as if one unexpected event could bend it permanently. He closed the notebook. For the first time, he understood that his anxiety wasn't irrational. It wasn't weakness. It was the natural response to a system that transferred enormous long-term risk onto individuals while maintaining the illusion of stability. And that's the deeper truth about retirement math in 2026. It's not that people aren't saving enough. It's that the assumptions behind the numbers have shifted. Longevity increased, healthcare costs expanded, pensions disappeared, markets became more interconnected and volatile, careers became less linear. The equation didn't break overnight. It slowly drifted away from reality. Daniel looked around his kitchen, modest, tidy, ordinary. He wasn't behind because he was irresponsible. He was navigating a landscape that had changed faster than the rules. The math didn't feel comforting anymore, but it did feel honest. And sometimes, honesty is the first step toward building something better, even if it means admitting the old formula no longer works the way it used to. For weeks after reworking the numbers, Daniel didn't make any dramatic moves. He didn't cash out his investments. He didn't abandon his retirement plan. He didn't suddenly decide to live for today and ignore the future. Instead, something subtler happened. He stopped chasing a finish line that kept moving. The idea of retirement, the one he had grown up with, was always clear in his mind. Work hard for 4 decades, hit a magic number, walk away, freedom. But in 2026, that picture felt outdated, almost industrial era, built for a time when careers were linear and lifespans were shorter. Daniel realized he had been planning for an ending. What if the future wasn't about ending work, but reshaping it? That thought didn't arrive as inspiration. It arrived as practicality. He began by asking himself a different question. Not, how much do I need to retire? But, how much do I need to feel secure? Those aren't the same thing. The traditional model demands a portfolio large enough to replace your entire income indefinitely. That requires massive capital. And in a volatile world, massive capital feels increasingly difficult to guarantee. But security? Security can come from more than one source. Daniel started looking at his life through that lens. First, he examined his fixed expenses. Not emotionally, just clinically. housing, insurance, subscriptions, car costs, utilities. He noticed something interesting. The less his life cost, the less pressure his portfolio carried. For years, he had focused almost exclusively on growing the top number, the investment balance. Now he shifted attention to the bottom number, the cost of maintaining his lifestyle. He refinanced insurance. He canceled subscriptions he barely used. He began exploring the idea of downsizing in the future instead of upgrading. None of it felt dramatic, but it felt powerful, because reducing required income reduces required savings. It was the first time he felt control return. Then he looked at income differently. For decades, retirement planning assumed income stops. But what if it didn't have to? Daniel didn't hate working. He hated the pressure of needing to work under any conditions. There's a difference. He started developing skills he had always postponed: consulting, teaching, writing, small projects he could potentially do on his own terms later in life. Not to hustle endlessly, but to maintain optionality. Optionality became his new favorite word. If markets underperformed, optional income could bridge the gap. If he wanted to scale back at 62 instead of 65, part-time work could soften the transition. If healthcare costs spiked, flexible earnings could reduce portfolio withdrawals. He wasn't replacing retirement, he was redesigning it. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. The old model demanded a massive pile of money to buy total freedom. The new model might be about building partial independence in layers. Layer 1, investments. Layer 2, low fixed expenses. Layer 3, flexible skills. Layer 4, realistic expectations. And perhaps the most overlooked layer, mental flexibility. Daniel began talking to friends his age, quietly at first, over dinner, on walks, after work. He discovered something surprising. Almost all of them felt the same unease. They were saving, they were investing, they were doing the right things, and yet none of them felt certain. But very few admitted it openly. Retirement anxiety in 2026 wasn't loud. It was silent comparison. Scrolling through social media, seeing someone announce early retirement at 45, reading headlines about financial independence achieved through aggressive investing, hearing podcasts that made six-figure portfolios sound inadequate. Daniel realized something critical. Comparison was distorting reality. Many early retirement stories relied on unique circumstances: dual high incomes, tech windfalls, extreme geographic arbitrage, inherited advantages, or perfectly timed market cycles. He stopped measuring his progress against outliers. Instead, he measured it against stability. Was he better positioned than 5 years ago? Yes. Was he more aware of risks? Yes. Was he building flexibility instead of depending on a single outcome? Yes. That was progress. He also redefined what retiring meant emotionally. The old vision looked like permanent leisure. No alarms, no deadlines, total detachment from the workforce. But when he pictured himself at 70, completely disengaged from meaningful activity, the image felt empty. Work, at its best, wasn't just income. It was structure, contribution, identity. What he truly wanted wasn't escape. It was autonomy. Autonomy to choose projects. Autonomy to say no. Autonomy to work less without panic. Autonomy to rest without guilt. That kind of freedom doesn't require infinite wealth. It requires resilience. Resilience in savings. Resilience in skills. Resilience in expectations. Daniel didn't stop investing aggressively. He still contributed consistently. He still believed in long-term market growth. But he no longer believed that one number would solve everything. The shift was psychological. He stopped seeing retirement as a binary state. Either you're working or you're done. Instead, he imagined phases: full-time work, reduced hours, consulting, seasonal projects, mentorship, passion-driven income, a gradual glide path instead of a cliff. And strangely, that idea reduced his anxiety more than any projection ever had. Because it acknowledged reality. Life is uncertain, markets fluctuate, health changes, economies evolve. But adaptability can outlast rigid plans. The saddest truth about saving for retirement in 2026 isn't that the system is imperfect. It's that many people are still chasing a rigid dream designed for a different generation, a dream that promised certainty in exchange for discipline. Discipline still matters, but certainty? That was never fully guaranteed. Daniel understood now that security in modern retirement planning is less about hitting a single target and more about widening your margin for error. Lower expenses widen it. Multiple income options widen it. Skills widen it. Patience widens it. And perhaps most importantly, realistic expectations widen it. One evening, months after that January morning, Daniel checked his account again. The number had moved, slightly up. He felt something different this time. Not panic, not even relief, just steadiness. He no longer expected the market to rescue him. He no longer expected a perfect economic environment. He expected volatility and planned around it. He expected change and prepared for it. Retirement, he realized, wasn't a single moment waiting at age 65. It was a gradual expansion of choice. And in 2026, choice might be the most valuable asset of all.